Hey folks, today I've got a full review of the Bryton Gardia R300. This is a cycling radar that Bryton announced last summer at Eurobike 2022, and it's now finally being launched in the American markets. However, this has actually been launched in the European and Asian markets since late last year in November-December timeframe. And that's something that's really important to keep in mind as I start talking through, frankly, all the issues that I've had with it. Now, if you're not familiar with a cycling radar, let me just very quickly kind of set the stage, if you will. Basically, the idea is that you take this radar, you stick it on the back of your bike, and then it tells you traffic that's overtaking you. The key word there is overtaking. I mean, it's going ahead and be tracking those cars, primarily your vehicles, any sort of thing at all, in fact, including cyclists, that now has a greater speed than you. You can see that right here. The idea being that while you might hear that car when it's really close to you, cars go really darn fast compared to cyclists, and this gives you just a few extra seconds to be able to go ahead and move a little bit further out of the way or just be aware of that car. This is especially notable as more and more electric cars get on the road that tend to be quite a bit quieter. The cycling radars are not new. The Garmin Varia radar has been out for nearly a decade now, and this unit is super popular with cyclists. It's one of the few products out there that pretty much is universally loved by cyclists that have tried it. Therefore, people are pretty darn excited about the fact that Bryton and Magene are doing the same thing for a whole heck of a lot cheaper. In the case of Garmin right here, their RTL-515 radar light combo dish is $199 US. Both Bryton and Magene radar and light combos are $129, so about $70 off. The last thing to understand about bike radars is they're basically compatible with everything out there. So in the case of all three of these radars, they follow the AMP Plus cycling radar device profile, which means that you can have a Garmin bike computer, a Hammerhead bike computer, a Wahoo bike computer, Stages bike computer. I think even Sigma supports it. I mean, basically every company out there supports this across the board for cycling radar. And in fact, even some watches also support it from Garmin as well. And just a quick note, if you are finding this video interesting or useful, just simply whack that like button at the bottom. It really helps with this video and the channel quite a bit. With that, we've got the R300 right here. Again, very similar in size. You can see the other ones, the same thickness as well, basically. It's pretty much a wash. The main difference, though, compared to Garmin is that this does have USB-C on the bottom charging versus the Garmin has micro USB. Garmin's newer radar camera combo that came out about a year ago, it does have USB-C, but that costs a heck of a lot more, includes a camera, and so it's not really the same ballpark right here. In the box, you will find a couple different mounts depending on what seat post style you have. And there's this industrial strength rubber band that goes around the back of your seat post. I've had no issues with that from really any of these companies, including Bryton. It attached to my bike, no problems at all. It should be noted the Bryton unit does also support the AMP Plus lighting specification. That isn't supported as widely. So in that case, it's primarily just Hammerhead and Garmin that support that natively. Wahoo, for example, does not. But I don't find that to be a huge deal because the lights are pretty much controlled by the radar on this side anyway. So you can also just press the button and it changes light patterns right there. Speaking of those light patterns, there are a bunch of different patterns. Here's just a quick graph on the screen right now. There's a high solid, a low solid, a group ride, night flash, day flash, and light off. And they each have different batteries that you're seeing on the screen as well. Let's look at some footage from out on the road. What you see on the screen is both the Bryton radar on the left-hand side and the Garmin Varia radar on the right-hand side. I'm currently recording these on two separate head units with a camera involved. This is like a hot mess to do on the daily, but I got it all figured out and kind of showing you what this looks like and to show you some of the good and the bad. Starting off with this first bit right here, you see that the car is coming up way in the distance there, and both units detected within about 1 second of each other, which is pretty common for the most part. And again, like 95% of the time, they detect the same. It's virtually a wash across the board. On the left-hand side, you see that yellow stripe. That's indicating where the car is in relation to me. As it gets to the very, very top, that means that it's gone ahead and basically going to be passing me, and it'll turn green. You can see as the car does this right here, gets closer and closer, and then once it goes past, it'll go ahead and change to green on both of them. It's, again, within about a second of each other, which is kind of where I want it to be. And again, just to emphasize that like 95% of the time, that's how it works. But the challenge with safety-type devices is that it has to work 100% of the time. And you can see this car right here, it's detected on both units, no problem. But once the car matches my speed, at that point it disappears. And again, that's not super uncommon in the Garmin as well. You can see that it pops in as it comes closer to me, the Bryton pops it up again, and then it kind of loses it. And at this point, the Garmin is still tracking it on the right-hand side there, but the Bryton just has completely lost it. And there seems to be just a little bit less finesse with how Bryton tracks these sort of cars that are very close in matching my speed, because at that point it doesn't know what to do. In fact, even notice now the Garmin's even tracking both of those cars there on the right hand side, whereas the Bryton has neither car. To be clear, matching speed type scenarios are tricky. The whole point of these radar is to look at objects that are closing that gap between you. So when they match the speed, there's like a little bit of a finesse there to figure out whether or not that object is actually still with you, or if it's gone ahead and dropped off, or is simply something not to worry about anymore. What I see over and over again is that the Bryton unit just simply isn't as good at tracking those objects that are still cars, but just, for a moment are tracking the same speed as you. Now in this next one here, I want to look at tracking clearance. Basically, when it goes ahead and said there's no more traffic next to you. Also note the number of cars that the Garmin sees versus the number of cars that the Bryton sees. So you can see this right here. There's 2 cars on the right-hand side with the Garmin, therefore 2 cars on the screen there, and then a 3rd car way back there, which the Garmin's detecting as well. And at this point, the Bryton goes ahead and gives the all clear, but there's still a car back there. And now the Bryton goes ahead and recognizes it again, and then again, it gives the all clear, but wait, there's still a car back there. Now then it recognizes again, and this is something I've seen happen over and over again, where it goes ahead and it says it's all clear, when in reality, it's very much not all clear. And like we saw with the previous clip, there's also just the problems with detecting multiple cars. You can see right here, boom, now there's multiple cars there. In this case, the Garmin side sees that multiple cars, but the Bryton only sees 1 car as being present, versus the Garmin's detecting that car way the heck back there, as well as the car that's close to me. Of course, cars that are hidden behind other cars is just as tricky for the Garmin. These are areas where if I compare side by side, the Garmin is doing a better job at detecting those cars than the Bryton unit is. Now next, there's actually 2 levels of radar detection on these units. There's basically normal speed and high speed. The idea being that if you're on a normal road with normal cars passing you, you just want to be aware of that car behind you. But if you've got a car that's overtaking you at extremely high rate of speed, way higher than normal, this will actually give you a red alert instead, basically saying, yo, heads up for whatever's going on behind you. But the problem is that the Bryton isn't really sure of itself. So here's an example where I pull over real quick to troubleshoot something else I'll talk about in a second. And you can see this like flickering back and forth between red and yellow, red and yellow. In case the Garmin, it just held red the entire time, but the Bryton kind of went back and forth and wasn't really clear what to do. And in fact, we see this again at the end of my ride here, was a car in the adjacent roadway right there, pure red across the board, and the Bryton hasn't detected it at all. There we go. Finally, it detects it, but it detects it as yellow. Now the car is slowed down a little bit, and so now you see the Garmin also go to yellow. Also note the Garmin has 3 different cars it's tracking at once there, versus the Bryton only sees the 1. Now, those are all mostly safety things, but there's also like non-safety things that are annoying. For example, you see right here this battery low message. For some reason, Bryton sends out a battery low notification at 50% battery. Like, why would you do that? And it kept on like sending it over and over and over again. Next, I tried detecting a Boeing 777 landing. So as I'm editing this now, I can see how this section might be a bit out of left field, but look, we got to find something funny in this review, and you never know when you might find yourself on runway on a bike with a 777. Sometimes this actually does work. Here in Amsterdam, there's a runway out in the middle of nowhere that has a bike path right next to it with no fences involved. They actually run a triathlon on this, and I was curious to see if I could detect it, but as you can see, it doesn't quite seem to pop up today. I have gotten detected in the past. I think it probably depends on weather conditions and all that kind of stuff. It's kind of a dreary day today or whatever the case is, so it did not work, but just in case you were curious. Now, it should be pointed out that cyclists that are overtaking you will also be detected, and that is absolutely correct. Again, it's detecting anything coming up behind you, and I actually find that pretty useful. You can see this just simple example of this right here. I'm at a stoplight, and a cyclist is pulling up behind me, and it detects it on the screen there. Again, that's the point. It's supposed to detect anything that's overtaking you, whether it be a motorist or a cyclist. I've had trains that are running right next to the roadway there. Which is another thing to keep in mind is if you have roadways that are right next to each other, you will go ahead and get detections from that roadway. You can see that right here, detecting the traffic that's not in the bike lane, but off to the side. That's totally fine. That's the same across all these radars. Here's another example of that tracking failure at similar speeds. You can see I've got a car that kind of pulls around the corner there, and it's immediately recognized by the Garmin, but it takes a second for the Bryton, but it does finally catch on there. And now they're both tracking. At this point, the car and I are very similar speeds, but if we are changing our distance a little bit, and then boom, we lose it on the Bryton side. And in fact, we lose it for the rest of this entire roadway. It never sees that car there. You can see I'm moving along here about 35k an hour, and the car there is, in the same general ballpark as me, but it's kind of slowing down a little bit, going a little bit faster here and there. And this is where the Garmin's tracking that vehicle the entire time, and it never loses it. And at the very end here, you'll see it go ahead and pass me. Here we go in just a second, passing a couple more different speed bumps and other cars, oncoming traffic and whatnot. Still chugging along, still tracking just fine, by the way. Has not lost me at any point in time here. See if it goes for the pass. There we go. Now passes me, and then it goes ahead and gives me the all clear. Now we have to get probably the two most critical areas, which is false positives and false negatives. False positives are annoying when it goes ahead and detects something that just simply isn't there. And in fact, I got one of those today in my ride at the very, very beginning when I hadn't even started recording the video yet. I was waiting to get about 15, 20 minutes out where most of the traffic is, because the first part of my ride is basically all bike paths that don't have cars next to them. So I didn't want to burn my GoPro battery quite yet then. But the cool part is I was actually recording the screens showing what the radar was doing. And what you see here at the very beginning is this weird false positive on the Bryton side. It goes like high detective red, basically high speed vehicle overtaking, then briefly to yellow, and then boom to green, saying it's all clear. And I've seen this on every single ride, not almost all rides, every single ride where it does these false positives. And if you look across the board at reviews out there, every single person has seen this. And again, false positives aren't like unheard of in the Varia realm. They do happen from time to time, but all the false positives I've had on the Bryton units are unexplainable. Like there's nothing around reflective that it's reflecting off of another car going a different direction. It's just like weird, like out in the middle country farm road stuff, false positives. And then we get to the final category, false negatives. And these are like the worst possible thing, because in this case, it's going ahead and saying the coast is entirely clear, there's nothing around, and there's a car right there. And I had a ride last week, a bit of a sunny day. The rest of my rides have been all overcast and kind of crappy. But last week a 3-hour ride, and I had false negatives. Here's a picture of the farm road that I was on, just to kind of give you an example how there's nothing like blocking me detecting traffic. That's not the car that you see right there, because I took this about a minute later in the opposite direction, but just to kind of give you a visual of what this farm road looked like. And it simply did not detect anything at all. And so that I saw, a couple times an hour over the course of this one ride. I haven't seen it on other rides, but I also haven't had other sunny rides. So maybe there's some connection between the sun and this sort of thing. But I've never had a false negative on a Garmin device ever. And in fact, I can't find any record of a false negative on like the Garmin forums. I went back searching 2 years on forum posts where people had issues on Garmin Varia radar for all sorts of things, just like random little things. And not a single person has said they had a false negative, versus me getting like 1 to 2 an hour over the course of a 3-hour ride is not terribly awesome for the Gardia R300. And ultimately, that's sort of where things land for me. I look at all these trade-offs, all these errors that it makes, and yes, it's $70 cheaper, and that's kind of nice, but half the time, including like right now, the Garmin radar is on sale for like $149 anyways, right? So you're only saving $20 at best, and for me, it's just not worth saving $20 to either miss traffic entirely, miss it when it's still there, as you saw multiple times in the video, or detect like phantom high-speed traffic that just simply doesn't exist. I'd love to see Bryton be able to fix this stuff, but I'm not like super confident at this point, only because the radar's been out kind of a while. Again, lots of media attention today, but at the end of the day, this unit has been shipping to consumers that you can buy in physical stores since like November, December of last year. We're talking 4+ months ago. This is something they announced last summer at Eurobike, so you're talking 9 months ago. And so my guess is they've been testing it and refining it over the time period, but at this point it's just simply not ready yet. I don't know how else to phrase it other than that. Anyways, hopefully you found this video interesting or useful. If so, go ahead and hit that like button at the bottom there, or hit subscribe for plenty more sports technology goodness. With that, have a good one.